Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this panel discussion event on AI and climate change, part of Critical Climate Week here at Ontario Tech University. I'm Dr. Peter Lewis, an associate professor in the Faculty of Business and IT and a Canada Research Chair in Trustworthy Artificial Intelligence at Ontario Tech University. I'm also director of our new Pan-University Mindful AI Research Institute, which we call MERI, which champions a thoughtful, intentional, inclusive, and deeply interdisciplinary approach to AI research and innovation. We're proud to be supporting this fantastic set of events this week, and thank you to all of the people who have helped to organize it and bring it together. Special thanks to our sponsors, David Peterson and the NGO Common Earth. Ontario Tech University is situated in Oshawa, Ontario, in Canada. As a university community, we acknowledge the lands and peoples of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. We're thankful to be welcomed on these lands in friendship. The lands our university is situated on are covered under the Williams Treaties and are the traditional territory of the Mississaugas, a branch of the Greater Anishinaabe Nation, which includes Algonquin, Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi. More generally, the city of Oshawa is situated on lands within the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississauga and Chippewa Anishinaabe, Hiawatha, Curve Lake and Alderville First Nations, and the Chippewas of Georgina Island, Rama and Beausoleil First Nations. As we come together to discuss our climate this week, we're grateful for the Anishinaabe who've cared for the land and the waters within this territory since time immemorial. We recognize that Oshawa is steeped in rich Indigenous history and is now present-day home to many First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples. So these lands do remain home to a number of Indigenous nations and people, and we express gratitude as they continue to care for the land and shape and strengthen our community. We acknowledge this land out of respect for the Indigenous nations who've cared for Turtle Island, also called North America, from before the arrival of settler peoples until this day. Most importantly, we remember that the history of these lands has been tainted by poor treatment and a lack of friendship with the First Nations who call them home. This history is something we are all affected by, as we are all treaty people in Canada. We have a shared history to reflect on, and each of us is affected by this history in different ways. Our past defines our present, but if we move forward as friends and allies, then it does not have to define our future. Today, we are meeting virtually, which means that many of us will be situated on different traditional and treaty lands, and lands with their own unique histories. I would like to urge everyone here to take a moment to consider and reflect on this history and its impact where you are. Oshawa stems from an Anishinaabe word meaning a crossing place, and has a further translation as the point at the crossing in the stream where the canoe was exchanged for the trail. When the word Oshawa was chosen as the name of our city, it reflected and recognized the importance of water and land to our community. Our city's name is a reminder of this important and powerful connection between people and place in the past, also of the present and for the future. And today, while COP30 continues in Amazonia, we are gathering here to consider this important connection between people, land, and water in the context of technology. And so I'm glad to be able to host this important conversation at the intersection of climate change and artificial intelligence. Perhaps something we can bring into our minds as we journey through the conversation over the next hour and a half is the ways of living and teachings of the Indigenous peoples across the world and here in Canada, especially as it seems that we have so much to learn from them about living sustainably. Unfortunately, we seem to be doing something else instead. Tragically, in Canada, analysis shows that human influence on the climate has made 9 heat waves across the country in just 2025, at least 2 to 10 times more likely to occur. With the August 2025 heat wave in Atlantic Canada, more than 10 times more likely to occur as a result of human-caused climate change. At the same time, severe flooding in British Columbia, Ontario, and Quebec, and increased rainfall across the country have led to an average of nearly $800 million per year in insured losses over the last decade. As extreme rainfall and coastal flooding increase, the annual costs of flood damage to homes and buildings in Canada are predicted to grow 3 to 5 times by mid-century, amounting to over $5.5 billion and reach as high as $13.6 billion by the end of the century. And we're witnessing new atmospheric river events, long, narrow bands of vapor that pick up water from the ocean and dump it as rain. At COP30, Conrad Beston, a stormwater supervisor from Canada, described these as, and I quote, like a river falling from the sky. And the impacts of climate change are felt disproportionately across the world, with the poorest on the receiving end of the greatest harm. The increase in annual heatwave days due to climate change on small islands and in developing states is more than 6 times greater than in Europe and North America. Coastal areas and low-lying islands such as the Maldives are at a high risk from rising sea levels. The rapid retreat of Himalayan glaciers threatens water supplies for major river systems throughout Asia. In Iran, snow cover across the country has decreased by 98.6% compared with the same point last year. In Tehran, only 1 millimeter of rain has fallen this year. This is a once-in-a-century event. Rising global heat is now killing 1 person per minute around the world, according to research led by University College London, the World Health Organization, and a large team of international experts. And economically speaking, exposure to high temperatures resulted in a record 639 billion hours of lost labor in 2024, which caused 6% of national GDP in the least developed nations to be lost. And the lack of scientific capacity and long-term weather data, particularly in the Middle East and North Africa, mean that attribution science is harder to conduct, and the true impacts of climate change are likely to be underreported. This is despite these regions being both among the hardest hit and the biggest fossil fuel extractors. We're now in a situation where humanity has failed to limit global heating to 1.5 degrees Celsius, in what UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres described as, and I quote, a moral failure and deadly negligence. And the 1.5 degree heating figure is significant because this is one of the thresholds beyond which ecosystems are pushed past catastrophic tipping points. Again, to quote Guterres, exposing billions to unlivable conditions and amplifying threats to peace and security. Yet still, every fraction of a degree counts. And let's be clear, the countries in the global north bear the main responsibility for these crises. And against this backdrop, humanity, almost exclusively the global north, is building potentially some of the most energy and water consuming technology that we've ever conceived. Modern artificial intelligence. AI is now way beyond the dream of a few well-meaning and curious academics, perhaps like myself. It's a dominant part of many economies in the global north, especially in the United States, with impacts on labor felt across the rest of the world. This is a technology, or more accurately, a set of technologies that at the same time is having and poised to have transformational effects across virtually all sectors of the economy. It's causing fundamental shifts to our relationship with information, creativity, work, and learning. Shifts that are poorly understood and where ongoing research is leading to an emerging and complex understanding. AI tools are in many ways quite remarkable. They're enabling people to use other languages, overcome disability barriers, create content, enhance productivity, personalize customer experiences, and much more. An AI research team won the 2024 Nobel Prize in Chemistry for turning AI technology to protein folding, enabling problems in areas like drug discovery that previously took years to tackle to be solved in mere hours. In the climate and environmental space, we hear news of AI systems being used to identify and predict wildfires and their spread, more accurately predict the weather, reduce the environmental impact of agriculture at scale, and much more. But all this also comes at an environmental cost. And this is really what we're here to discuss today. So I'm delighted to introduce our panel of experts for a conversation at the intersection of AI and climate change. Dr. Merlin Chatwin is the Executive Director of Open North. Over the last decade, Merlin's professional and academic pursuits have focused on supporting governments to more effectively identify and address the needs of residents. He spent 4 years working directly with local governments in Ghana, founding a Canadian startup that supported valuation-led taxation reform in different regions of the country. Merlin's extensive domestic and international experience focusing on public consultation, policy development, and local government reform led him to Open North. As the executive director, Merlin is steering the Montreal-based organization onto an international stage with a fully remote workplace operating on a 4-day work week. Merlin recently began a postdoctoral position at Ontario Tech University, where his research takes a decolonial perspective to critically examine how AI technologies are disseminated from the West to the global majority. Dr. Hannah Kerner is an assistant professor at the School of Computing and Augmented Intelligence at Arizona State University. Hannah's research focuses on advancing the foundations and applications of machine learning to foster a more sustainable, responsible, and fair future for all. As the AI lead for NASA's agriculture programs, NASA Harvest and NASA Acres, she's deploying research methods in real applications across the globe. Her projects have directly resulted in optimized agricultural planning, disaster response, and financial relief in various regions around the world. The impact of Kerner's research was recognized in Forbes 30 Under 30 and the International Research Center on Artificial Intelligence's top 10 projects solving problems related to the UN Sustainable Development Goals with AI. Dr. Theresa Miedema is an associate teaching professor and associate dean at the Faculty of Business and IT at Ontario Tech University. Theresa teaches courses on business and sustainability, business law and ethics, and the law and ethics of analytics and AI. Her legal research and practice have blended international development, the regulation of the ICT sector, and ethical dimensions of digital technology. She recently completed training to become an ambassador for Climate Interactive's En-ROADS, Climate Policy Simulator. Dr. Miedema's interest in digital technology and sustainability has led her to work on projects with the International Telecommunication Union, the World Bank, InfoDev, the Eastern Caribbean Telecommunications Authority, and the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity at UC Berkeley. And we're hoping to be joined as well by Dr. Tamara Knies, who is the director of the Data and Society Research Institute's Climate Justice and Technology Program, and she previously led the Algorithmic Impact Methods Lab. Before joining DNS, she was lead researcher at the Green Software Foundation, director of developer engagement on the Green Software team at Intel, and assistant professor of media studies and director of gender and sexuality studies at the University of San Francisco. Tamara holds a PhD in media, culture, and communication from NYU. Her work has been supported by the National Science Foundation, the Internet Society Foundation, the Mellon Foundation, the American Council of Learned Societies, the Intel Science and Technology Center for Social Computing, the Consortium for History of Science, Technology and Medicine, and the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. And unfortunately, Tamara's been called away for something urgent, and we're hoping she'll be able to join us as we get started. So what an incredible set of panelists. Welcome, Merlin, Hannah, and Theresa, to our panel today. The format for this evening, everybody, will be the following. So first of all, I'm going to invite each of the panelists to introduce themselves in their own words and to share their opening thoughts about this complex topic here at the intersection of AI and climate change. We'll then get into some questions and some conversation. And then towards the end, we'll pose some of the audience's questions to our panel. So if you do have a question, we have a Q&A box here in Google Meet. You have a little box of dots in the bottom right, and if you click that, you'll see Q&A, and then you can put your question in there at any time, and we will come to them later on in the session. Okay, so welcome to this session. Welcome to our panelists. Merlin, could I perhaps begin with you?
Absolutely. It's nothing like being on a panel with other panelists that just the reading of their bio is intimidating. So I appreciate going first, because then I can get it out of the way and we can let them take over. As mentioned, my name is Merlin. I'm the executive director of Open North. We're a not-for-profit based in Montreal, working across Canada, but also globally. And what we do is we contribute thought leadership and direct services to government and other civic-minded organizations in the areas of data management and data governance, cybersecurity, data spaces and data collaboration, and privacy compliance. And so our entry point into responsible AI is through data quality and security concerns, and a focus on the common good. And as mentioned, I also am a postdoc at Ontario Tech in the political science department, working under Dr. Timothy McNeil. And my current research examines how Canadian imaginaries, and a lot of people laugh that maybe there isn't a Canadian imaginary, but we have multiple, how they influence and are reflected in efforts to assert Canadian sovereignty in AI policy and investments in infrastructure. And I use a decolonial perspective, examining how the different imaginaries intersect with questions of power, place, and Indigenous data sovereignty. So my perspective on this conversation is that although there's real tangible uses of AI in climate action, we really need to ensure that its use doesn't intensify existing inequalities or further marginalize vulnerable populations. And I know that's a fairly obvious statement, but that's really the entry point for me. And that vulnerable population perspective is really within our communities in Western countries, but also then outside in the global South with other countries that are being exploited and extractives and such. And so then looking at like a climate justice lens, the fair treatment and real meaningful involvement of all people impacted by climate change, I think it has to be embedded in decisions around the design and deployment of AI. And then at this point, and not to be completely negative, but given that the major foundational models are profit driven and led by people that maybe questionable morals and ethics, I think that the extent of the negative environmental impacts is largely unknown to everyday users, right? It's just sort of inevitable. It's going to be attached to everything you do, and just, don't pay attention over here with the communities that are being negatively impacted. And I think that, pushing for more transparency and clarity on those impacts is a really good place to start.
That's great. Thank you very much, Merlin. Opening perspective. Appreciate it. Hannah, can we turn to you next?
Yes, thank you. I'm super glad to be on this panel with Merlin and Theresa, who have a lot of expertise that I'm excited to learn from today. So I am a machine learning researcher at Arizona State University. I lead a lab of about 10 researchers, including mostly PhD students and some postdocs and faculty as well. And we work on research topics that range from the very foundational to the very applied. And so we try to incorporate this idea of user-driven research in foundational research development, where we're not just creating things on the foundational side, we're not just creating things that have no use case ever, or have no kind of constraints or requirements in mind for what they would eventually be used for or what the needs of real people are. But then at the same time, on the applied side, we want to make sure that we are using what the most recent or performant methods are for solutions that we want to deploy for end users right now. So I think by having these two end members spanned in our one little lab group, we can have more impact on creating more useful technologies that we hope actually get used and meet the needs of real users. So a lot of the work that we're probably best known for in our research group is machine learning for satellite remote sensing data. We've done a lot of work in recent years on developing geospatial foundation models. Some of those that we've developed are Presto, Galileo, and most recently we released one called Olmo Earth that was developed primarily by the Allen Institute for AI. And we've also developed various data sets like the GeoBench data set, and now GeoBench 2 is coming out for trying to benchmark these geospatial foundation models on a lot of different tasks relevant to climate change and environmental applications. We also do a lot of work on the applied side in agriculture. As Peter mentioned, I'm the AI lead for the NASA Harvest and NASA Acres programs. And so we are developing lots of technologies and systems that are leveraging our research methods to do things like monitoring agriculture statistics or assessing the impacts of shocks like disasters or conflicts on food cultivation, food production. For example, with the Famine Early Warning Systems Network and other end users, and creating large-scale data sets of agricultural variables. Like we have a project called Fields of the World, where we're trying to map all of the fields in the world using our AI models to support applications like supply chain traceability and verification applications. So on this topic of the good, bad, and the ugly, I think it's really easy as an AI researcher or a consumer user of AI today to feel like AI is only large language models or these large foundation models. And really, this is just like a very recent but very loud spot in a long history of research in AI. And still today, there's a huge plurality of research that's being developed. It's just, this is just the dominant train moving forward, and the most egregious user of our resources too, right? And it feels often like the only way to do anything meaningful is to use these kinds of models or build on these or build new versions of them. And it may not just be a feeling, it may be a command from a lot of companies or leadership saying that, this is the train we all need to hop on. But we don't have to accept this narrative that this is the only way that we can achieve good performance using AI, or that this is the only thing worth studying in AI right now. I think if we do that, then we're going to miss out on what the next paradigm shift in AI could be, right? So it's not just that there are other ways, it's that there could be something better even, right? We don't want to just latch on to this one thing as the dominant narrative. And really, this whole approach, in my mind, feels a little bit lazy. It's like the brute force solution, right? More just like scale everything, right? More compute, more data, more everything. It's like, okay, yes, that's like our inefficient solution that we present first. And then we're like, okay, let's profile this. This is not going to be the best way to do things. How can we do this differently? How can we achieve similar performance in a smarter way? And we know with research now, that we can achieve comparable results in a lot of tasks with, for example, mixture of experts models or types of architectures that are routing different pathways within a larger model and only activating a small fraction of the model parameters at a time. So you effectively have much smaller models, or designing our data sets differently rather than just dumping everything we can possibly get our hands on into this model, having more curated data sets that are more efficient to learn from. Or even better problem designs, right? If we don't try to have one giant model to solve everything, we can have smaller, individual, more customized models that solve problems more efficiently or more interpretably. So I think despite all this, like, these tools are undeniably useful, right? Generative AI models, large language models, um, they're not going away, and they are incredibly useful. And even I think this applies to all of AI research, that the compute has just gone beyond what we ever imagined needing or wanting. And we don't feel the true cost of it as researchers or consumers. And that is a problem that we have to solve for climate change, not just in AI, in computing, right? None of us feel or realize the true cost of our clothing or of our computers or our phones or our food that we're eating. And so um, I look to social science researchers or other experts to how can we figure out ways to make this cost feel real? Because right now it feels like our only bounds are how much money we can spend. Um, and I think that needs to change in AI research for us to really change our research agendas. Um, and we also need to figure out, how do we influence who gets to decide that research agenda? Right now, that agenda is just dominated by tech companies. And so I hope we can find ways of prioritizing other voices and defining those research agendas, and incentivizing different kinds of work that's not just who has the most money to spend at conferences and who has the most reviewers in the reviewer pool from submitting the most number of papers from a research institution. Um, so I think these are hard questions for us to solve, but we do hard things, so we can do it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Hannah. We appreciate those thoughts. Lots to unpack there as we go through the conversation, I think. Theresa, over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for this invitation to participate this evening. In my ear, my mic sounds a little cranky, so I apologize if you're getting a little cranky. And just a heads up that if I lean over, I'm not having a stroke. I'm petting a cat who is due for his evening cuddles. So just wanted to let you know that. I also want to start by acknowledging that I am in Toronto, and Toronto on land that is historically occupied by the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe Nation, and currently is largely the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, particularly the Mississaugas of the First Credit. This land is governed under the Toronto Purchase, but also it is governed by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe to share and steward the land together in peace. And I think that's always a good place to start when we're talking about sustainability and making commitments to not just sharing resources, but stewarding them together. Um, I, um, I, I think my colleagues have raised some really great questions here. So I think I'll try to build a little bit on what everyone has said and start by saying a very typically maybe professor thing to say, which is, are we asking the right questions? There is so much buzz about, is AI good or bad for climate change? And I think that's the wrong question. I think it's the wrong question. And I think Hannah has wonderfully pointed out that there is a lot of good stuff coming out of AI, stuff that can really help us live more sustainably. And Merlin, I'm very interested in your research about imaginaries and how we are thinking about these problems and imagining what AI is and what business could even be. Um, I think we have to really pay attention to what the right question and the right issues are, and not get bogged down in a false dichotomy between AI good, AI bad. It's so much more complex. It is so much more complex. And I think one of the, if we want to get really serious about climate change, and obviously we do, and we have to really confront some of the underlying values that has brought us into a crisis position in the first place. And I've got a newsflash: it is not AI. It's us. It's us. It's our overconsumption, our addiction to stuff, our ability to consume and impose the costs on other people. It's our need for dopamine hits. Um, and I think it's the overvalorization of efficiency as the value, the core thing we ought to always be prioritizing. And I'm sure there are business people right now saying, how can you be teaching at a business faculty? And sometimes I ask myself the same question, right? But um, at the same time, I think there's some things that we can learn from the language of business, including the idea of externalities. And if we want people to value things properly, if we want people to use AI more responsibly, we have to internalize the externalities that are currently occurring. And the externalities in particular are the carbon footprint and the gross overuse of water. If the price for accessing AI were better through things like carbon pricing, people would think about whether or not to trade jokes with ChatGPT, right? I think that could be part of a way forward, a part of using AI more responsibly in commerce and elsewhere. You've got to internalize the externalities that are currently occurring. I would also say two other things that I think can be very helpful. Sustainability reporting. And yes, right now there are lots of sustainability reporting standards and whatnot, but I think we really need to push for better sustainability reporting, including clear, transparent disclosure of AI impacts on all types of fronts. I think that can go part of the way. One of the projects I worked on at UC Berkeley involved talking about sustainability reporting in the context of cybersecurity. We could probably do it. We could do it with AI and sustainability as well. So that's maybe something we could talk about at some point. The final thing I would say is that climate change is a systems problem. Okay, it is a systems problem, and systems are very, as we know, very, very complex. Understanding a system is very difficult, and that's an area where AI can actually really, really help. Using things like reverse propagation and other tools that we use to understand large mental machine learning and deep learning right now, using those techniques to try to leverage explainability can also be used to help us understand what is going on in natural systems, and therefore where can we best use our resources. Like, we're facing species extinction at untold numbers. We can't save them all, unfortunately. Which one should we prioritize? This is something where the people who have developed deep learning models, machine learning, can really offer some insight here. We can use the technology that's been developed to help us make better decisions, to help clean up the mess that we have created. And let's be very clear. Humans created the problem, not the technology. Humans. And we need to own that. So I will leave it there, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Theresa. Thanks, everyone. We're going to run this fairly informally. I do have questions, but I'd say to all the panelists, do you have any initial responses to each other? I think kind of reactions to what you've heard. There were a few questions that were thrown out there that I think were already very thought-provoking.
Yeah, as Theresa was talking about quantifying the externalized costs of these technologies, it had me thinking just about how
it just doesn't seem like people are shocked when they learn about the impacts, right? When I've told my students some of the statistics about like ChatGPT resource usage, they're like, no, why'd you tell us? But then, everybody is visibly shocked. Just like, you watch a documentary about the food system and you're like, oh my God, this is terrible. Or you watch something about fast fashion and you're like, oh my God, this is terrible. And then, most people go back to eating those products or consuming those products or using these technologies. And I don't know, maybe I'm being cynical, but it feels like the only way to get anyone to change behavior is making that resource actually finite to them. And that's like the case with money, right? We get awarded grants in dollars and we're told, okay, how are you going to find the compute resources to do what you're proposing, right? So I'm given a certain amount of dollars, but I can go find infinite amount of compute, right? I don't know, maybe if funding agencies said, as part of the budget, like you can only spend this many GPU hours or something on this whole project. I don't know. It just feels
or
like
maybe you can only
limit.
maybe you can only generate so much carbon. Sorry to cut in, but I like that idea. But
Yes.
this is your carbon budget. That will never happen, I don't think. That sounds very cynical. I'm so sorry, but
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying is, I think no matter how much we talk about these issues, like we were saying before this panel started, it's COP30, right? We're still here. We're all going to be here for COP31. And, nothing changes unless the resource runs out. So sorry, I don't mean to make this a super abysmal note, but it just seems like, unless I don't know how we really limit that in our society.
well, I wonder, Merlin, maybe some of your work might be able to inform this. And I'm thinking about, how the imaginaries that you've been talking about, and um, how can we reboot, for lack of a better word, um, our cultural understandings of our relationship to technology and the costs of things, and how can we maybe even challenge the norm of efficiency as being this, the key measure of everything? Can we reimagine? Can part of our strategy be reimagining our relationship and rethinking how we, like the cultural narratives? What do you think?
All very good questions that are going to take some time. I think what's interesting, and it relates to something that Hannah was saying about just laziness using the big models and what's there. The Canadian imaginary is often largely summed up as being not American, and it's about recreating the things that we are dependent on in Canada with all of the flaws, instead of taking a more collective approach. And so it's interesting, when I started this research, it was like, okay, what are the Canadian imaginaries? How does that relate? What's the Canadian imaginary around AI? And then it's, my next question is like, well, what should it be? And it's like, well, I can't do that because that's like layering my bias on it. And that's where it came to the, how do you decolonize our thinking about what AI could be? And I've heard it said, we were talking about it just recently around even our legislative responses to AI in Canada. They were set up to fail because we attempted to regulate technology that has profound collective implication using legal tools that only recognize individual rights. And that's because we import that, right? And so what is an approach that that can move away from just not being American, and then sort of reimagine what AI in Canada could look like, one that is problem centered and one that is looking at creating putting efficiency into the technology and the compute rather than making us more efficient, right? It's a thing that they talk about. It's like we want AI so that we don't have to work as hard. We don't want AI to produce art so that we have to work harder, right? And we kind of, as a society, have it backwards. And so it's sort of recentering what is the purpose of efficiency should be to have more freedom and have more time to do other things, not to just work more and to destroy more. I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah, fascinating. And I think from my point of view, I'm a computer scientist, and I've often thought it fascinating, just the whole imaginary around artificial intelligence in the first place, like the idea that we have this like mission to try and create something that's essentially like a human brain in a vat, but inside a machine, right? To be able to solve the kinds of things that that at different times in history people have thought were associated with quote unquote intelligence, right? Whether that's playing chess or winning Jeopardy or something like this, rather than some of the other very human qualities that perhaps Theresa, you were alluding to in terms of what's really needed for us to be able to solve these kinds of wicked problems.
Yeah.
We seem to be almost trivializing historically the notion of intelligence when we build it like this, perhaps.
Yeah, I just totally had a senior's moment here, even though I'm not a senior, honestly. Because I was just thinking, I had a thought cross my mind about the things you were just saying there, but of course I've just lost it, figuratively, not literally. But my thinking, I guess, is going around how we're thinking about these resources and what they can do and where we can use them. And it's interesting when you look at some of the stuff coming out of COP 30. There's a lot of talk about, oh, AI can, not solve climate change, but it can help climate change, and they provide a whole bunch of really positive and accurate uses. Predicting wildfires, predicting famine, monitoring species loss. The thing that they don't talk about is that the countries that most need that technology are in the global south. And the global south is not the region where a lot of the problems have originated. That would be us, the global north. So there's an inequity problem, but there's also a very, very practical barrier, and that is infrastructure. Like I think people may be shocked to know that 40% of the world does not have reliable access to internet at all. 40%, so how are we to leverage AI to support climate change in the countries that are going to be most severely impacted, when those countries are still struggling to, get their basic ICT infrastructure up and running, and through no fault of their own. Like I'm not saying that it's on them, but it's sort of like we're the ones profiting, and then we're saying, but don't worry, you countries that are most severely affected by climate change and AI, we'll give you an algorithm to help you figure out when there's going to be a famine.
Which is another way to profit from it.
Which is another way to profit. And I really, I think part of, we need just a fundamental reckoning with some of the mental models that are driving these models in business. Full stop, right? There's in the sustainability world, they talk about true pricing of goods, true pricing that internalizes the externalities around, the human labor and the cost on the environment. And maybe we need to push for that more. But it means we have to get over ourselves and our enjoyment of an easy life. It's part of it.
So I'd like to just bring it maybe back a little bit, because there may be people in the audience who are not familiar with some of the things that we're talking about, and I think this is a theme that's been very prevalent in the conversation so far, is this lack of understanding around actually what some of the resource costs are. So you talked about externalities that maybe are not apparent. Hannah, you've talked about your experience talking to students about the resource costs of these, and likening that to things in food systems and in fashion. So maybe I could just, for people who don't know, just at what scale is AI's resource usage today? Do we know? I mean, what sort of evidence do we have about its impact on the climate in terms of things like emissions and water and energy usage?
It's massive. We're talking data centers in the US, consuming the same amount of energy as an entire country like Norway, right? I looked this up before this evening, but I don't have the numbers handy, but it is not an exaggeration to say that the water consumption and the electricity consumption of these data centers, the data centers alone, are on the same scale as an entire country. That's a lot.
It is a lot.
And again, the water, we're talking about an increasingly scarce resource, right? The amount of water that is necessary for the data centers and the algorithmic training models and whatnot is very large, and the electricity. We've seen in the States, for example, where some states have had to go back to using coal to generate electricity, and we can sort of say, well, we'll use AI to make more efficient AI, but even a little kid should be able to say, wait a second. You're using the problem to fix the problem, right? Like, maybe we could just rethink about what we're doing with how much, what we're doing with the AI in the first place, that is creating the problem, right? And this idea, there's this little circular logic, like, well, we can use AI to use AI more efficiently so that we won't have so much of a carbon footprint. Come on,
Hannah, are there any stats in particular that your students were astonished by?
Yeah, this is kind of out of date, but I think Theresa's stats about like country scale usage are more timely. But I think one thing that I think a lot of people forget about, especially like the whole argument about large language models and foundation models in general, is that the majority of the cost is in pre-training. So, you train this giant model on a giant data set, on a giant data center, but then when you use it, it's much cheaper, right? So if you're like just prompting ChatGPT, it's not nearly the same cost as training GPT, right? Which is like, comparable, to the usage of a state or a country, a US state or a country. And but those costs are still significant in terms of usage. Like, I think this is probably even larger now with the more recent ChatGPT versions, but a couple of years ago when I was sharing this statistic with my students, it was like every chat session, which is like 5 to 60 maybe prompts, depending on how complex the prompt is about like a 16-ounce water bottle. I'm sorry, everybody else in the world that uses metric. Us Americans and you not Americans, I guess, in Canada, as the imaginaries envision themselves to be or not be, use a different measurement. But yeah, so essentially I was like, telling them, and I try to do this too, like every time I use it, like, is this worth just like dumping this water bottle out, and maybe sometimes you think it is, but maybe it makes you think about it a bit more. But you know, that cost is relatively small compared to the pre-training cost for those types of models. But in my field, where we're working on geospatial foundation models, which are a lot smaller than these large language models, like our most recent model that I mentioned, Olmo Earth, we have a resource like environmental impact assessment in there, the cost of in that paper, and the cost of pre-training and fine-tuning the models. And that cost is like 10,000 times less than, you know, GPT-4. So it is a lot smaller, but again, the dominant argument is like, well, we just pre-trained it one time and now you can essentially use it for free. Like we've put all the costs up front and now it should be minimized. But when you actually look at the costs, a lot of these kind of domain specific foundation models, in this case, like remote sensing data specific, and I'm sure it's similar for like medical imagery or other kinds of data types, not language or text data. It still requires a lot of tuning. It's not just like ready to go, just predicting the next word, like large language models. We have to like, a lot of these models require not just like using what comes out of that model in a downstream application, but actually like fine tuning the whole backbone of the model in order to get better performance than if you had just trained your own smaller custom model. And I think people don't usually think about that cost of fine tuning, which when you quantify it, especially if you have pretty large data sets that you're doing this with, like for your task specialization of the model, it's like as much as pre-training in a lot of ways. And so, you know, you're going to be doing that for all of these different tasks. It's like, if you want to map crop types for this set of crops in Canada, you're going to fine tune all the models. And then we also are not thinking about, in a research setting, just like the huge experimental demand that is put on researchers for peer review. So, you know, I may know that testing 15 other models on 15 other data sets is not going to show any difference in results. It's not going to change the conclusions of this study. But for me to get my work published in these, you know, premier computer science venues, I have to do that. And so there's this huge cost of just giving credibility to our models that we're trying to develop to solve these problems too, right? You know, if you're presenting a small model, you have to show that like how the big one would do too, right? And so there's just like all of these additional costs, I think, that like the experimentation and development and stuff that are not really tracked. And then, like I said, again, like these things that we think of as being minimal, like adaptation for specific tasks, actually end up being quite significant.
That's fascinating. I hadn't really realized that the fine tuning, but it was so significant. And I suppose when you think about the number of different domains that these models are mapped into, that it starts to scale horizontally very quickly, doesn't it? Yeah, and that's a wonderful. So I'm going to make a mental note for reviews. If someone's tested their model on Llama and Claude and ChatGPT, I'm not going to say, but you didn't try DeepSeek, right? Go and do that one as well, please.
Exactly, but again, when you're doing those reviews, you're not thinking about like, okay, researchers only have X amount of resources to spend, right? Like the only resource we ever talk about being finite is time and money.
Time and money, absolutely. To Theresa's earlier point, and I think, you know, so in preparation for this, you know, I went and did a little bit of research as well on some of the numbers here to make sure that we had some. And I agree with you, Hannah. I think one of the main studies that people have relied on was that one from GPT-3, where they did a study on the water usage of inferences, which is around 500 milliliters for every chat session, essentially, in terms of usage. But the other thing is it varies substantially based on where the data center is based. That was the other result from that study, I think. Some numbers
and
around.
the other thing to keep in mind is that GPT-4 is like way bigger.
Way bigger. Yeah, they're getting bigger and bigger by orders of magnitude.
So like multiply all those costs by orders of magnitude.
Yeah. And just in terms of, you know, linking this to climate, I mean, I read a piece of research that said that and we seem to have more data on GPT-3 than the ones that came after. I don't know if there was a window there where they were allowed to do more research, or there was more transparency for a while. Training GPT-3 apparently consumed in the order of millions of liters of water and generated around 283 metric tons of CO2. Was the start from the research. That was GPT-3, which, as you say, was a lot smaller. And I think when you look at this kind of across the sector as well, I mean, Google, Microsoft, NVIDIA all abandoned their carbon pledges in order to expand AI capacity, right? And we know that that's happening. I think I read that Meta and Amazon's emissions have doubled in the last 5 years, largely driven by this kind of stuff.
Peter, if I may just build on that, one element that has been encouraging was the International Court's decision in the summer that said generally that you can bring an action against a country, but also against private companies for failing to meet their commitments to under the Paris Accords and so on. How that's actually, what that's going to look like, what the remedies are going to look like, has yet to be seen. But that was a very important legal decision, and it was a little bit of a heads up to companies that you make these promises, you scale back, there could be legal consequences, and that's a starting point, right? And it's interesting that comes through the international court, that collective sense of responsibility and holding various actors to account. And Merlin, your work on decolonization is very important in this regard, right? The collective stewardship of resources. And I wonder what insight you might have about, decolonizing our approach to who gets to benefit from AI. How do we use, if we think of AI as a resource that we might find in nature, how do we collectively steward that appropriately? Does that question make sense? It made sense in my head, but a lot of times things that in my head don't necessarily translate. But Merlin, I wonder if that question makes sense, if you could bring in some of the decolonization work you do, so that, to help us appreciate the collective stewardship element.
Yeah, I mean, I my first instinct when you were talking about the international courts is like they're a colonial infrastructure as they are, and we've seen over the past couple of years how useless they are when push comes to shove, which is sad. Sad and maybe an opportunity that, since our collective world order has fallen apart, maybe we can rebuild something that is actually in the collective interest. I mean, I don't know that I have a good answer. I think, there is an approach, I think, that does align with a climate justice approach. And I think Peter was talking about it earlier too. It's the amplification of indigenous knowledge and people that have stewarded land for, far beyond the time that we've been around. But it's the part of the work that I do is this, looking at how the creation of models in the global north and Western countries, and then how they're imported into other situations. We know that this is wrong. We know that they're built on our own biases, but somehow we don't know how to fix it. And I think, we have inherent just compute issues that, that people much smarter than I will have to figure out, right? Like, if you just look at the lack of compute capacity, the difference between the US and Canada, then you think about sort of the orders of magnitude difference of countries that are just developing their ICT infrastructure. How we can even pretend like creating something on the compute capacity that we have is going to work for anybody else, let alone, how we're exporting through funding and such. We're exporting AI policy and AI public-private partnerships, and all of this is just a exploitation and neocolonialism reimagined in digital times. But I mean, the answer is not complicated. The implementation of it is what's complicated, right? The answer is you don't build without local, you involve in a meaningful way, you take the profit motive out and create digital public infrastructure, target climate finance where it's needed the most, and close participation gaps in environmental governance. Like, we know the answers, but we don't have the political will or the separation between capital and our collective conscience to do them at this point. So how that happens, that's the wicked challenge for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, from a technical point of view as well, I think that one of the things that I'm actually quite interested in is the growth of these smaller open models that can be, say, run on a phone or something like this. These are starting to emerge now in places where there isn't that kind of infrastructure. I've seen a few examples of this kind of thing, and I think that speaks a little bit to Hannah. You were talking about different sorts of models and things like that, and I wonder. So Hannah, you obviously did this work on agriculture as well, and have you got maybe some examples of where you've seen some of this sort of work in agriculture with AI work really well, perhaps, or maybe even addressing some of the challenges around that Merlin just brought up?
Yeah. So in agriculture, we've tried to work with. I hate this term as a computer scientist, like end users, and I'm sorry I keep using it, but I just don't know what else to call, maybe in like a more human way, what people who are using these technologies are. But we work directly with communities and organizations who are wanting these solutions to be developed, which ranges from like community organizations in Maui, for example. We're working with a lot of local organizations and indigenous community leaders to help the community of Maui County to identify and develop the kinds of tools that would be useful for the problems that they're trying to solve in Maui County, related to agriculture, but also all of the land, which is very interconnected in terms of land resources, water, data governance, all these things, all the way to governments like ministries of agriculture in different countries who are trying to better get data about what production of agriculture is in their countries, where agriculture is being produced, what types, how efficient it is, where, maybe things are not being efficient, that would be better left to regenerative land or forest or some other kind of natural land area versus, areas that might be more suited for producing agriculture. And, we try to work on problems that you can't really solve without AI. So, for example, the project I mentioned, Fields of the World, there's no way you can manually digitize every field boundary in the world and do it every year yet, or every agricultural season. And, in a lot of places, the shape and exact extent of those boundaries changes. But that is the kind of information or data layer that is needed to implement climate change mitigation or adaptation policies, like the EU deforestation regulation, for example, or similar policies that are trying to incentivize or ensure sustainable supply chains. So, for example, the EU deforestation regulation, for those that might not know, is this regulation requiring that all commodities out of this list of, I think, 7 commodities, including soy, coffee, cacao, and cattle, so beef and others, be sourced from plots of land that have not deforested in the last 5 years. You need digitized boundaries to implement this kind of policy, but they don't exist right now. So we need to be able to, we need to develop AI systems to develop certain solutions at the scale that we need to address these problems, right? But at the same time, I think there's a lot that is overblown, but also sort of like still a dream in terms of supporting agriculture with AI. Like a lot of, there's always been, like when I say AI in agriculture, everybody thinks of like precision agriculture on the farm, like exactly how many drops of water should I put in this field, and the reality is that like Theresa and Merlin were saying, a huge part of the world that's producing, most of the food does not have access to like the drone that's gonna fly over and like the communications infrastructure, and then like where are we gonna get all these batteries? I don't know, the Wi-Fi networks, blah, blah, blah. And, that's just, it's not a very scalable technology, right? Like if we have to put all this hardware everywhere in order to do this, like we're just it's never gonna work. And the reality also is that farmers are business people and they're not going to take risks on, what this algorithm says they should be watering or how much fertilizer they should be applying and all these things, when it's already really hard to be a farmer. I don't think anyone in the world is just like, maybe some people, but most people in the world are not like, let me just like deforest all the land and like just trash this planet. Like people are weighing these costs, and certain costs feel more immediate in the short term. Like I'm going to lose my entire farm and millions of dollars, or like this whole community's livelihood if I don't add some more fertilizer to make sure this is good, right? And so I guess a lot of these visions we have for how AI can help, I'm not sure like we've fully thought through, and they're definitely not being realized right now. But at the same time, I think there are a lot more scalable types of solutions, like using satellite data to scale software over, creating insights over very large areas from this regularly collected satellite data that is free, like all of this data from NASA, Landsat, the Sentinel series of satellites from the European Space Agency, that is all free public data. And so, that's, I think, more accessible as a solution for a lot of people. And again, going back to this example in Maui County, we're trying to work with community members to develop AI solutions that allow them to benefit from these technologies and these data, and be the ones who decide what kind of technologies get built and how these data get used, right? Because the alternative is that large companies or governments are using all of the same data to exploit people, like for example, through insurance schemes or land purchases or all kinds of things.
Peter, I wonder if I could ask a question, because I think, having Hannah and Theresa here, the American-Canadian perspective, and a place that I really don't have an understanding, but are there is there funding opportunities that would allow for the creation of these like targeted models, smaller models, to sit outside of a typical profit motive. And, you know, I asked because just the other day, and it's half a second event, working in cybersecurity and you know, providing cybersecurity services to organizations that can't always afford it. And one of the other organizations that does similar work to us announced this large scale initiative that's funded by Google. Or like, you know, this is this is not there's a profit motive there. This is not a altruistic, you know, like, so are there funding and funders in Canada, in the US, that you can identify that would help move this forward?
I'd say absolutely. And this is an area, you know, from my background, that I would say we need to look at sustainable models of financing. And there are all kinds of finance models for exactly these types of projects. There are climate transition bonds, for example, that can be used to help companies finance the adoption of technology that is more efficient, that is greener, that helps them streamline their logistics. There are bonds. Basically, you know, if you want to, you can have social impact bonds that are targeted at certain types of social outcomes. For example, women's empowerment. There are green bonds where you're financing, for example, a company that is in the business of building solar grids. They're called solar bonds. There's a cooperative in Ontario that sells those bonds. You can also use models of financing to help improve outcomes with financing. For traditionally, for a conservation type of activity, you might have a philanthropist or the government say, okay, here's a check, here are the deliverables, go at it. There are conservation impact bonds that change the funding mechanism a little bit to involve an external investor that fronts the money. The community organization takes the money, implements the project, and when they've met their deliverables, you do have the government or philanthropist at that point stepping in to give the financing, which gets paid back to the investors with a little bit of a small premium for the interest. But what that does is it increases the efficiency of the funding, right? Because now there are deliverables, now there are expectations. It's usually done in ways that involve a lot of local consulting, including with Indigenous elders and Indigenous communities. There have been some really amazing examples. I think that there are absolutely solutions. It's just a question of getting the right people in the room, right? It's really, I know we've talked a lot this evening about the will to do this, but the reality is every single one of us, we can make an impact. We can make an impact. We do make an impact every time we buy something because we're voting with our wallets. We can make an impact when we are more careful about our financial investments, and when we start asking, looking around, investigating different models of financing, green financing of AI that is more stewardly, that is using these different models. Absolutely. I think that there's just ample potential, and this is where business can really make a difference. This is, business can be positive in this regard in terms of helping finance these types of things. You just got to promise them like 5% return. 5% return to front the money.
Those were all new mechanisms for funding to me. So I'm excited to learn that there are a lot of new things that I didn't know about, and I wish I knew how to connect those opportunities more with the kinds of people that we're working with and trying to find funding for. Because interestingly, Merlin, like you mentioned that these companies have a profit motive, maybe are not where we want the money to be coming from for doing this kind of work. But as an academic, in the US, where most of our research funds come from National Science Foundation, or agencies that are really focused on fundamental research, it's interesting that the companies are actually the ones that enable us to do applied research most of the time. So like all of the money, most of the funds that my lab has got for doing this kind of like community-centered participatory research in AI has been from Google or Schmidt Sciences, Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO of Google, or coming from philanthropic foundations, like private funders. And really, like, those have been some of the only ways that we can not just do that type of work, but be able to pay people in these communities to do the work with us because of restrictions of government funding. Like, we've had lots of collaborations to develop these systems for agriculture monitoring, for example, in countries in East Africa and West Africa in particular, but we can't give funding for people to collaborate with us on this work. Like, I can't give a subaward to my collaborator at a university in Uganda from National Science Foundation money, but we can from this private funding, and often that is explicitly required. So it's kind of interesting that the private money has been what's enabled us to do what we haven't been able to do with public money for public goods.
And just building off of that in terms of the developing context, never underestimate the power of people's imagination, just common everyday people. Before we had internet banking here in the developed West, I believe it was Kenya, they were using minutes, literally trading minutes as money. Because it was a more stable form of currency than the actual country's currency, right? And this led to the M-Pesa system of mobile banking. And then everyone else caught on and goes, oh, wow, we could do this electronically. But early models were people way outside of urban centers saying we need a stable way to transfer something of value, and minutes on phones provided that, right? That's beautiful imagination, right? And that's where I think AI can also help us. And like, I got to make a plug for Climate Interactive and the En-ROAD Simulator to bring people together and show them, let's try this policy and see what could happen, and have very sophisticated modeling right up there, right in front of our eyes, showing what different changes would be, and then looking at different elements of, okay, how is that going to affect crop yield? How is that going to impact this, that? That's making good use of it. But let's unleash our imagination and the power of everyday people. I really believe that can make a big difference. Using AI, not only as a problem, but really using it to help us bring real solutions.
Yeah, and thank you. And I mean, you articulated earlier on, Theresa, as well, the the role of business in doing this, and we've talked about the role of private funding and how valuable that can be. Hannah, you talked about how the farmers are business people, right? And they're used to kind of measuring these kinds of things to assert the value of them or not, right? So I'm actually really curious, because we looked at some of the stats around some of the costs, and we talked about the challenges of transparency there. And then you said, Hannah, that some of these positive cases had not really been fully kind of worked out yet, or some of them were a little bit pie in the sky, perhaps paraphrasing what you said, and hadn't been proven out. I mean, is there robust evidence of the kind of value of some of these interventions using AI that we could point out?
I think so. I think, though, the reality has been mixed, that there are findings that some of the and really it's not so much, I would say, like the AI solution, but the regenerative or sustainable practice that we are kind of implementing using AI. So, for example, like conservation tillage, or practices like this that are pointed to as conservation farming practices. There was a study that a researcher in NASA Harvest did named Jill Dines that showed that like conservation tillage helps in some places but hurts in others. And I think this is just one example of this kind of like yes and no reality of a lot of these solutions, is that there's not just like one thing that's going to work everywhere. It often depends in terms of the benefit on the land, but I'm sure also like the business models that you can come up with. And I think that just points to a greater need for community involvement in designing these solutions, because people in the community know best about their land resources, how different things are connected, what business models will or won't work. And I don't think we're going to see a lot of success in just trying to apply one thing across the board. And again, that's where AI can be useful too, is for coming up with solutions that are adaptive, and taking into account a lot more variables. Like maybe in one place this solution makes sense, in another place this other solution makes sense. But I think really we've just lacked the data to be able to make much meaningful progress on this in like public sector research. Like in academia, it's not really something we can work on because most of the data is warehoused inside these large agricultural companies.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
And coming back to this point earlier on as well, that I think Merlin, you brought up and we talked about around the challenges of even being able to understand what the costs are, what the benefits are, to be able to help a community or bring a community to be able to make a well-informed decision about how to do something like this. I mean, maybe I could ask you, Merlin, from your experience, I mean, do you have any advice or good practice in like ways to try and work with communities around these places where we have so much uncertainty around systems and their values and their costs? Any examples there, perhaps?
I mean, not specific to AI. I think the examples are specific just to proper sort of public engagement, in that it requires investment in capacity. You can't just go and ask somebody to make a decision about AI without any sort of knowledge base, any more than you can ask about land use decisions for the average individual. And the further away they get from that field, the more sort of investment is required. And I know that I've come across as being fairly anti-AI, but like, it does have its uses. And I do think, we're a part of a project for using AI for predictive analytics in cities and around urban heat islands and stuff. And it's really like planning for the margins, right? You plan for those who are disproportionately going to bear the consequences or the negative externalities. Because if you plan for the margins, then everybody else is taken care of. And I think that too often we sort of plan for the efficiency and plan for the fast rollout and plan for the mass scaling rather than planning for the margins. And because it's not efficient and it's not cost effective. And so I think, as I'm a broken record, we have to move that profit motive out when we're thinking about how to use AI to improve the public good. It has to be slow. It has to be context specific, problem driven, and like I said, planning for those people who are on the margins, who have the most to lose.
Yeah, sound advice. I think I find myself, and as we kind of come towards the end of this sort of the time that we have here, this is a fascinating discussion, by the way, kind of wondering if what sort of prospect for hope there is to be able to actually engage in this meaningfully. We've talked about some of the challenges. It seems pretty wicked as a problem to be able to even make informed decisions around this. And then in the context of the current kind of buzz and hype and massive amounts of commercial interest in particular kind of imaginaries and narratives around AI that exists at the moment. Maybe I'll just ask each of you to kind of give a final kind of statement, but maybe to answer as well, like, do you think we have a good hope for being able to do this well, or do you think it's it less so? And who wants to go first?
I can go first. That I think that what recent developments in AI have shown us is just like how much can change if we invest our minds into a focused goal, right? And I think that what has been the outcome of the last few years, or last about 5 years of research in a lot of the AI community, has really surprised a lot of people, like including myself as an AI researcher. There are a lot of things that we do now that I never thought we would be doing. Like I never thought that we would have like an entire area of research on optimizing prompts for LLMs, like let alone LLM, like the fact that just next token prediction was such a fundamental task. But like this has been really jarring, and I think that has, I hope it's for me, but I hope for others as well, kind of like shaken us out of this small ball mentality that like, oh, we can't do this or we can't do that, we can only do certain small things. But like we can actually do pretty big things that have drastic outcomes or changes in the way we thought we could do things before. So I'm hopeful about that.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Who wants to go next? Final thoughts, Theresa?
Sure, I'll jump in, and I'm just going to warn you, my cat is on a chair next to me and he looks ready to jump in, so I hope that won't happen, but I'll try not to say the F word if it happens, okay? Just in case my mom watches this. I have cautionary hope. I think there's so much potential in AI to do all kinds of good for human flourishing. But with respect to climate change, lots of awesome potential. The real problem is us, right? It's not AI, it's not the technology, it's us, our addiction to convenience. It's easier for me to use ChatGPT to write this, one paragraph email than do it myself, right? Or than to do it myself. We're addicted to what is easy, what is convenient, and consumption. And we have valorized efficiency. And the real challenge, I think, is harnessing our imagination and reimagining what it means to have human flourishing, and disconnecting that from efficiency and economic growth, right? Challenging those models and harnessing the power of the moral imagination to envision a better form of human flourishing. If we can get behind, and I say it's just like, oh, that's easy, right? It's not easy. It's not easy. It's really hard, but it's not impossible. That's what I would say.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Merlin?
I mean, I think that's a really good way to end. Let's focus on human flourishing. If we can get the Gen AI bubble to pop, maybe we can find some of that flourishing in the ashes of it. That would be nice.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think that is a great way to end. I mean, I think, yeah, so I mean, Hannah, your point, actually AI as human endeavor, as I found myself scribbling as you were talking, like, I think it just does prove what we can do as a species when we really want to, right? When we really want to invest in something. And then I think, yeah, Theresa, your point about reimagining, harnessing our moral imagination, you said, right? Harnessing our moral imagination. I think what a wonderful phrase maybe to leave us there with, because we can do these huge things if we can harness our moral imagination in this way. Thank you so much for your contributions and your time this evening. This was a wonderful conversation. I think we could have kept going and dived into all of those points in much more depth. But thank you, Merlin, Theresa, and Hannah, for your contributions. Thanks to the audience. Thank you very much for our sponsors, David Peterson and the NGO Common Earth. Thank you to the Ontario Tech University for hosting this wonderful week of events. And yeah, I hope this gave you plenty to think about.
And thank you, Peter, for facilitating the discussion.
Yes, thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you,
It's great
everyone.
to be able to do this, and it's a wonderful university's a space where we can have these kind of conversations. I think it really shows the value of universities as well, actually, as places of collision and inquiry like this. So yeah, thanks.